Welcome, divas and dudes, to Powerhouse Bakery. It's awesome to have you here in this funky March, right? We were just talking that it's hot and cold, and I guess that's just typical for March. But hopefully that's not stopping you from getting out and about. Just don't plant your gardens until after next weekend. But hiking is the best in March because it is cool. So as long as you dress in layers, you can, be warm, and then you can take off a layer and keep on going. Anybody get a hike in last week? Anybody do an exercise class? All right, this is the months to do the outside activities, because come July, you're going to go, I'm not going outside, it's too hot. So this is the best time. So we are in the middle of our topic called Fitness Fanatics. And I absolutely love this topic because, for one, I know I'm preaching to the choir because all of you are convinced that exercise is good for you, and that's why you're part of the Diva and Dude program, and we're getting you exercise classes and just getting a rich exposure to how to move, how to nourish your bodies, and really how to just get the most of your wellness paradigm. And that's what we're all about. Since I've opened Powerhouse Bakery almost 10 years ago, and the reason why my first logo was a pomegranate with a little weight through it was because I believed that the powerhouse of nutrition was really twofold. You have to exercise the bodies, and then you have to fuel the body. So the pomegranate was the food, the little weight in the center was the athletic reminder that we all are part of this paradigm of eat well, train hard, repeat. Now, I know all of us are in different stages. I think I told you last week that I was training a lady that had never exercised before, and she decided, darn it, I'm going to start. I want to strengthen my bones. And even if she's in her 60s, she was determined to do something, which I'm so glad. You can always start anytime and make benefit. The trick is, how do we increase our stamina? How do we increase our muscle strength? How do we maintain and not get injured? Because of course that's really important, right? If we have a pain that is going to stop us, no pain, no gain is wrong. Because then you have to sit out and let that body heal, which of course ruins our gains. And so today what I really want to talk about is how to fuel the muscles. And what we're talking about is really everything you need to know about fueling an active body, and at any age, because what's so important is that you learn to apply the information that we're teaching you in these classes. I know Brenda's doing an awesome job teaching you about carbohydrates, teaching you about sugars, and I've been so lucky to get to serve you guys for so many years, and we're talking the same message, which is how do we fuel our bodies so that we can fight off cancer. We never ever want it to show up again. And how do we get the most out of every day of our life? Of course, we don't know what happens tomorrow. This could be our last day on earth. So we got to enjoy today and make the very best of it. And so much of that is how we get out and about and enjoy fun and laughter, and movement is part of that. So the Funatics, I told you last week I started a little nonprofit, but it's not just for little kids. We should all be fitness fanatics. We should do it for fun, and we should be committed to how to do it well so that we don't white knuckle it, meaning you don't go through an experience that you hate. Years ago, I don't know if you knew Oprah Winfrey, when she talked about training, and she told everybody how much she hated running. But darn it, she was going to do it anyway. And she's obviously a very driven person, so we can always do things even if we don't like them. But to really make it valuable and part of our wellness, it's got to be fun. I really believe in that. And what we talked a little bit about last time, and these are just reminder slides. So there'll be a couple slides that I'll have that you won't have, and that's just to allow you to take some notes and have fun with it. But last week we talked about the types of muscles in the body. And I was pleasantly surprised to realize that some of the divas and dudes didn't really know that we had 3 different muscle types. And that helps us respect the fact that our bodies are a miraculous invention of the Lord above. It really takes a community of cells to get this human body going. And so I love that. We introduced the myofibril, which is the smallest working muscle unit of the skeletal muscle. We talked about hypertrophy. Do you remember what hypertrophy means? Growing bigger in response to an external stimulus. What's the external stimulus? Exercise! Yes, we're going to push our bodies. Our bodies are so miraculous because they say, okay, if you're going to do that, I will get stronger, bigger, faster, stronger. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we fuel that phenomenon? How do we help the body really get stronger, bigger, and faster? And so that whole idea is hypertrophy. And something that we talked a little bit about last week too is that there's influencers, right? We had a little fun at the very end of class, and we talked about the body types, you know, and I didn't want you to think too much about that. It's just kind of fun when you can see your grandkids and nieces and nephews and say, oh, that's going to be an ectomorph. She's going to be naturally thin. I had a cousin that I was so jealous of because she was tall and so skinny. The whole time growing up, everybody could say, oh, Ramona can eat anything she wants. And now, at 60, she's an apple. She is an apple. And I can say that now because I know she's not watching this. But, you know, if only we had helped her along the way and said, you are thin now. But that doesn't mean you can eat anything you want because you're a thin kid. That means you have to understand your physiology and work with it so you can be healthy through the ages. Cool. So here's those examples of types of muscles. And I love my big muscular guy. And so many people said, oh, gosh, don't like that look, you know. And I get it. But it's kind of fun to realize the extremes that we can take our body to. We can do so much with our body. We have to take good care of it. We have to ask of it. And we have to train it carefully. And wow, we can do so much. He wasn't born that way. I talked a little bit about the cardiac muscle and reminding us that the cardiac muscle is a different style. It's striated rather than more aligned. And it's so amazing that from the moment of conception till the moment we die, our cardiac muscle doesn't stop. It doesn't take a rest. It might speed up and it might slow down. Let's hope it does, both. But it never stops. And so fueling our heart muscle is so important. And if you remember what I said, that the favorite fuel of heart muscle is what? Anybody remember? Sugars. Sugars. So what we're going to talk so much about today is the basic building block of fuel, of energy. I talked a little bit last week about how all the muscles prefer blood sugar. And it's very common that we think it's protein. The macronutrient that gets all the glam right now is protein. Do you know that, especially in the US, only 3% of the population doesn't meet their protein needs? Wow. And that's looking at everybody, 3%. So that means that 97% of us get the protein that we need probably without even trying, because we really don't need that much. And exercise definitely needs to rebuild and restore and repair, but always is going to come down to how do we get the basic form of energy plus all those micronutrients that we need to also build up the frame of the muscles and the cardiac muscles as well as all the other tissues of the body. And so I hope the end of our talk today, you're going to have a whole new appreciation for carbohydrates, because right now they're still the black sheep of the family, right? We have healthy fats. Oh, they're good fats. You can eat them because they're good fats. Carbohydrates, you know, they just kind of get thrown under the rug, but they do find their way to slip out whenever we have a little food craving, right? Right? So we know we still eat carbohydrates. I had a lady yesterday that I was working with, and she says, well, I don't eat any carbs, but boy, I do have a sweet tooth. So she's going to avoid potatoes, but she don't take away her potato chips. And it's like, girl. Or, right? Or she'll go through Whataburger, but she wouldn't be caught dead eating pasta. Right? Because the mentality is that carbohydrates are bad. But you're going to succumb every once in a while to, you know, I'm too busy to cook, so I'm going to go through drive-through. And what I try to convince her is that let's rethink this and find some great carbs. I mean, I bet if you knew there was a wonderful bowl of pasta waiting for you at home, you could probably pass by Whataburger. knowing that it's going to take a minute or two in the microwave to warm it up, and you're going to have your yummy pasta and not Whataburger. I don't know, just my thought. But of course, the cardiovascular strength, so our heart muscle, is so critically important. And of course, we can't change our body without actually doing something. So lifting heavy things and running fast are absolutely the stuff of movement and the stuff of changing our bodies. So at any age, I want us to feel empowered to know what can we do, what should we eat before and after a big hike. I know Jose takes you guys on hikes. I'm so excited that you guys do that. Nothing is better than sucking wind outside in the fresh air with your friends around you and having fun doing it. So get out there and hike as much as you can. So Glycogen Stores, the stuff of So I'm going to talk a little bit about what these beautiful carbs are all about. So when we think of sugars, I know there's a big difference between the white powdery stuff that shows up in foods and what I'm showing up on the screen right now, which is a beautiful plate of risotto, right? So what I want to kind of help you see, and you might not have all these slides, so I just want you to have some spots to take notes. What I want you to think about is continuum. If sugar is going to be the most simplest form, and it's going to be things like sugar and maybe even honey, and then we could go up a little bit more and we could say maybe white rice. What would be some other simple sugars? Fruits. And we go a little bit more and we say, okay, maybe a potato, like a sweet potato with skin, maybe some hard winter squash. You know me, I talk about that all the time because it's so good for your gut. And then we go all the way over here and we have more complex, so simple to complex. And you'll find things like lentils and beans. And so when we think of how our body gets sugar, it depends so much on how the sugars are wrapped. And I bet you Brenda talked about this in her class a little bit on carbohydrates, because simple sugars are going to be low in fiber, so they're actually easier to digest. They're going to get to sugar faster. There's going to be a little bit less protein, but not necessarily less micronutrients. Because look at here, when we get this little section of fruit, micronutrients are pretty good. You know, we even talk about like athletes. This is crazy, but athletes love to eat gummy bears as their simple sugars during their road events. So most of you know I'm a sports dietitian, and I worked for many years for the teams at HEB. I was their health and wellness coach. And they love to have gummy bears. They love to have all the goos. If you've ever been to a 5K, you know, maybe even something that's more like a triathlon, supporting friends and family, they would give you goos and gummy bears, and then they would, at the end of the race, they would have apples and bananas. You wouldn't see lentils, right? You're not going to see that at the end of the race. But the whole idea is that the simple sugars are easiest for the athletes to digest and absorb. And that's good because it gets to the sugar faster to fuel the muscles. And we love that because we want to make sure that the body doesn't run out of the sugar called glycogen. So simple to complex, as we go this direction, gradually the fiber goes up, the protein goes up, and it takes a little bit longer to digest. But all of these foods ultimately will go up to sugar. So sugar isn't really a bad term. We've created it badly because most of the time when we think of sugar, we think of white refined sugar that shows up in things like ice cream and candies, right? Frostings. But it's really the stuff of energy. So what body parts need glycogen? So I guess what we could first do is just do a little reminder. Glycogen is stored in our muscle, and it's also stored in our liver. And what's really important is that it's stored there because It's so important that that body has a reserve of sugars. So when we're exercising, or we're just sitting in a chair and we're doing our work, or we're mopping and cleaning the house, we're using blood sugar. So our body stores it as glycogen. And it, again, there's only so much sugar that can stay in your bloodstream. If you know somebody that's diabetic, their body can't take up the sugar from the blood. So the sugar stays in the blood, and that's really bad for the small arteries and veins of the body. Because remember, it makes it sticky. I talked a little bit about that last time. So the body is very smart. It says, no, we're not going to let sugar hang around in the blood very long, but instead we're going to put it in a storage form, and it's going to be where the body needs it. And so right along the muscles, and of course the liver becomes this storehouse of sugars. And so the good thing is we've got this great depot all throughout the body that is going to store sugar, so that is going to be readily available for all the working muscles. And now in your next slide, what I'm talking about here is not only where it's stored, but what muscle or what tissues besides muscle use glycogen. So brain cells, not to mention heart, not to mention smooth muscle, kidney cells, red and white blood cells, even the fat cells. Now, albeit the fat cells don't use a whole lot, they pretty much just are kind of fat and sassy. They just sit around and be their own fat selves, right? They don't do much. So they don't use a lot of sugar, but they still do have some glycogen stored. Have you ever, or maybe somebody in the room has, done a rapid weight loss diet? Or you've read about it on Instagram, and you see from, 1 week somebody lost 10 pounds or sometimes even more. Not necessarily going to be true fat loss. So if we looked at body weight in relation to glycogen, glycogen's really cool because not only does it store sugar, but in order to hold on to this sugar, it has to have a whole lot of water. So our body's going to store this and all around the muscles. And you go on a fad diet. You're getting ready for a wedding, and you need to lose 10 pounds by next Saturday. And you starve yourself. Are you really shrinking the fat cell? No. You know this, right? What's happening? Yes. Your body is going, okay, fine. She's going to try to starve me. I've got a better idea. I'm going to use the sugar that I've got preserved all around my body parts. And of course, whenever you take off that sugar, you're going to cleave off some water, and that's going to go out of the body. Your body's going to burn this sugar fuel. Is it burning any fat, by the way, while it's doing this? Nope. Very little, but probably none. Because it's so much easier to use up the glycogen stores. So what happens is the scale looks lighter, and you might even feel a little bit less plump and fluffy around your midsection. Why is that? Your liver is right there, and it absolutely loses weight when the glycogen gets decreased. So when the glycogen goes down, the liver shrinks, and you feel like, oh, now I can tighten up my belt one notch. I can fit into my lower size jeans. But it really, over here, the little fat cell is under lock and key. Fat and sassy. It's not been opened at all, right? Because there's so much sugar reserves. And so it's interesting to me that, we do the fad diets and we feel like we're losing weight. And what happens when you get past your wedding and you start to eat just a little bit normally, right? All the glycogen gets restored. Now, sometimes what will even happen, which is discouraging, is your body goes, okay, she's trying to starve me. I'm going to make this fat cell even a little bit bigger, right? For the next time she tries to do that. Yeah. So it doesn't mean at all that we're losing fat. And what's so important is that the glycogen is the way the body survives really well if we don't have food to eat. So when we think of the fuel, why do we need glycogen? Of course, our brain needs it for thinking clearly. Our blood sugar is going to be what crosses the blood-brain barrier and fuels all the neurons for their activities. Something that's really interesting that's kind of coming into the world right now of science is that Alzheimer's and brain disorders are starting to be seen as diabetes type 3. We know diabetes type 1 is when something happens, maybe it's a viral infection of the pancreas and it can't make enough insulin. Type 2 usually is where the peripheral cells, like the muscle cells, can't seem to get the doors open so that the sugars come in. Now type 3 is, wow, it's going up to the brain to fuel the brain's function, and it has a waste product that the brain can't effectively get rid of. And so those buildups are starting to be what we think is the problem with Alzheimer's. So the other thing that's neat is that glycogen stores, when they start to change, they act as a fuel gauge. So this is really cool to me too. So when we do those little fad diets and we try to reduce our calorie intake and the glycogen stores go down, guess what happens to our appetite? It goes up. Yes, because the glycogen stores that go up to the brain, and if there's not quite enough in that blood level, that definitely happens. Also, it helps store calories instead of shunting into the fat cells. So this is really cool. If we were to have a garage, I don't even have a garage in my house yet, so that's what I'm dreaming about. Here's our garage. And when we eat food, and some of that food is going to get burned for energy. So, and let's just suffice to say that a mixed diet. So the trend right now in the health and fitness world is stop counting calories, stop trying to do macros, which I love. And that it's talking my language. I was on quite a few blogs over the past week, cycling and marathon and triathlon athletes, and they're talking my language. It's like, what, have you been listening to my videos? But what's cool is they're saying that the food that we eat is going to be burned, and some of this energy is going to go into storage. The trick is it going to go into fat cells, or is it going to go into something else? Now, when a body is athletically trained, so it doesn't matter if you're a mesomorph or an endomorph or an ectomorph, exercise stimulates storage as glycogen. And this is what we love. Would we rather have glycogen as a quick energy source, or would we rather have the fat and sassy? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because it's a whole lot easier to burn blood sugar than it is to open up this lock and key and get the fat cells out. Once those fat cells are in, baby, they are not wanting to come out. They are fat and sassy. They do not want to come out, right? They would much rather stay there and just convince the brain, no, leave me alone, I'm padding, right? Leave me alone, I'm padding. No, we really don't want it to ever go in here. We'd much rather have a garage that's going to store more blood sugar. And when we walk and exercise and challenge our muscles, the body is stimulated to go, oh, okay, I'm going to need more sugars, so I better make some shelves. It's no longer an empty garage, it's got shelves, meaning that there's more place to store glycogen. This is how your body responds to exercise. So you eat food, less will go to fat, more will go into your garage to store. And that's what we love. So you have a rich supply of glycogen, and the fat cells start getting unhappy because they don't get any. So it becomes smaller and smaller because the fat cells aren't getting more nutrients added in. So we definitely want the garage. And again, every time we exercise and we eat right, the garage is stimulated to build more shelves. Okay? Pretty cool stuff. So it also helps with our flight or fight. So if you have a need for a burst of energy and you have a nice full garage, you are going to be able to sprint out of the way of a lion. Now, I know we don't have a whole lot of lions in San Antonio, but let's suffice to say that you have more energy within every one of your cells, more energy in your brain to think clearly and act on the spot, more energy in your smooth muscle and your cardiac muscle and your skeletal muscle to really be able to do the things you're asking it to do, which I think is pretty darn cool. So, as I've mentioned, glycogen is a storage form for energy. So how do we then make the most out of our eating plan to really think about what food should we have so that we can have energy for our workouts and not have fat storage? So I mentioned a little bit about the macronutrient conundrum. We don't want to have to count calories and be too obsessed with the breakdown, because again, who thinks in grams? How many grams of protein did you have this morning in your breakfast? Like, I don't know, I just had a piece of toast and an egg, right? And so most people don't think in grams. So one of the reasons why I'm so happy that most of the athletes are saying to the goal to increase your endurance, the goal is carbs all the way. Carbs, baby. And so we love the fact that now we get to understand more about carbohydrates. So when we think of the fad diets, and you certainly have heard a lot about the big ones. So we know that if we restrict a macronutrient, like give me an example of a fad diet that restricts a macronutrient.
The keto.
Yes. Which macronutrient does it restrict?
Carbs.
Yes. Keto. It says instead of carbs, we want you to have lots of fats. And there are some anecdotal evidence, I guess, out there that says, oh yeah, these athletes do great. There was an interesting article on swimmers that ate a high-fat diet, and they were able to do improve their personal best. Anecdotal evidence is really difficult because it makes us think that, well, if it worked for them, it must work for me. We know that in the science world, to really make good decisions, we cannot rely on anecdotal evidence. We have to look at a large body of evidence. And I've talked about that a lot. And we know physiologically and metabolically that our muscles need sugar. So it doesn't mean our bodies can't use ketones. And these athletes that actually perform really well, they are working hard. And so they're going to see some gains because they really are believing in it. But most of the research says that the only way to really build endurance is with carbohydrates. What's another one? We've talked about, the paleo diet, which is kind of a middle of the road. It says, a good blend of protein and carbs. There was a study, in fact, that talked about, or really looked at athletes, and they had 3 groups. They had a group that had high protein. They had a group that had high protein, I'll say moderate protein. Now, what's really important is when we look at studies, we first have to say, okay, is it a smartly designed study? And in one of the research studies, it didn't have the same calorie level. So it would make sense that if any one of these had more calories, would they have a better result? And that would be, well, probably yes. But what I thought was so interesting is when the same calories were looked at, what we found is if you focus on just carbs, you get more endurance, more energy, and you feel better. Now, it doesn't mean proteins aren't important. It just means that we need to think of timing. When should we eat protein? And when should we eat carbs? And the reality is most of our foods are going to be a blend. Can you think of any food that is only a carbohydrate?
What, fruit?
Yeah, fruit. What else? Rice, pretty much, white rice, right? Some pastas are almost all carbohydrate. Now, Yeah, and all the veggies. And again, you're pretty hard pressed to find anything that's no protein. Even strawberries. I remember studying that, and there's like a gram of protein in, I think it's 2 cups of strawberries. Not much, albeit, but some. And so the good news is, even when you're doing these studies, the most important thing is if you're going to look at a comparison, you got to keep things the same. So if they are getting the same amount of calories, is their endurance improved based on, the macronutrients? So the takeaway is that when we build our meals, we want to focus on carbohydrate foods, and then we still get some protein that comes along with it. So now let's get a little test going here. So if we look up at the screen and we say, okay, which of those activities are going to tax my glycogen stores? So walking, running. What do you think? Yes, yes?
Yes.
Okay, what about watching TV?
No.
What about shopping? It depends, right? How fast you walk. What about weightlifting? It depends. Yeah. Swimming.
Yes.
And of course, soccer. I should have put cycling because that is one of my all-time favorite sports that I did a ton of, but I didn't. So the messaging here is that when our muscles use sugar, now right now when you're sitting here, you're mainly burning fat. And that's because you're bringing in plenty of oxygen to be able to oxidize fat, which takes a lot of oxygen. If you are walking fast, for sure if you're running, you are breathing and you're trying to get out of your oxygen deficit, meaning you're trying to pay an oxygen debt, but you're always a little behind. So whenever you're in an oxygen deficiency, your body starts relying on your blood sugar a lot more. So pretty much all of these, I mean, you could stroll, I suppose, but other than this one, you're having to bring in oxygen, and the harder the activity it is, the less fat you burn. And so that's discouraging. You're like, wait a minute, what? I thought I was doing all these dance classes to burn fat. Not quite. We train the body so that we can store more glycogen so that we don't have fat cells get bigger and fatter and more sassy, right? So the activities are almost always using blood sugar. And that's why it's so critical, so critical that we replenish and we train the body to store glycogen better, because we don't want to have the fat cells get bigger and bigger. So that really leads me to, of course, how long would you do the activity? So if you go on a hike that's 15 minutes or 2 hours, your body is going to eventually get fatigued, right? So there is going to be a blend of some glycogen and some fat that your body would use. But for the most part, you'll need to replenish. So what should you eat during your activity? Do you ever bring a snack when you go on the hikes? Or is it just long enough where you get home and say, okay, I'm famished. Now I'm going to refuel. Yeah?
I think you should take fruits.
Yeah.
Some fruit.
Yeah. Exactly, the simple sugars. In fact, there was another study that talked about fruit, which is a simple sugar, and one that's a little bit more complex. So maybe some crackers. When you combine simple and a little more complex, you actually get a better sustained energy level. So that's kind of good too, right? So anytime you're doing an activity, we want to know that we're not burning fat, except for when you're sitting in your chair not doing much. And of course, are you burning very many calories when you're doing that? No. I know, and it almost seems discouraging. It's like, well, how am I ever going to get those fat cells to stop being so sassy? And so really learning about the calorie balance equation, but training your body to store glycogen is the best way to go. So now let's talk a little bit about the pre-workout meal. So there used to be a talk about glycogen loading and, eating a big plate of pasta before your big race. Has anybody ever done a 5K or supported a family member? Yeah. And they would always go to a big Italian restaurant the night before. You wouldn't see me in there. For one, if you have a full tummy and you start to go out and do activity, you're going to look for a restroom really quick, right? If you've ever been at a race, you know the line is the longest at the outhouses, especially in the beginning of the race. Because you also have a little bit of nerves going on, in a race for sure. But we know that pre-workout meal is really important because it depends so much on your individual body type too. How your body handles food. So in general, we want to make the little caveat that the week before is really important. The week before means your typical eating should already be pretty high carb. And just as a little side note, what kind of diet am I kind of describing? Primarily plant-based diet. Because you have a hard time going high carb if you're a keto or even a paleo eating style where you have 4 to 5 ounces of chicken twice a day. I mean, you're just stuck. You can't get enough carbohydrates. A cycling athlete, now granted, I know none of us are cycling athletes, but just to put it in perspective, they need 3,000 calories of just carbohydrates in a typical day. It's like, wow, that's even hard to imagine what that would look like. But for us, suffice to say that when you eat a plant-based diet, it makes it a lot easier to focus on carbs. So before your workout meal really starts the week before, and we want to know that we're getting high carbs. Another really neat study that I looked at in recovery of athletes looked at when their diet was high carb and they used foods that were high in antioxidants like blueberries, lemons, like lemon juice. On all of my nutrition notes, if I've met with you, I almost always in your sample day say water with lemon. At least get 1 lemon every day because that is a huge good dose of vitamin C. In fact, when they did studies on supplements of vitamin C versus real food of vitamin C, the supplements actually caused harm to the regenerating muscle. It was too much, too fast, it breaks the blood vessels. When you get it in food, you get this great benefit. And it's like, wow, no wonder God made these perfect foods. Blueberries, lemon juice, cherries were part of this study that, and tomatoes. When they refed the athletes with these foods, when we're talking high carbs, so now it's like, okay, so instead of gummy bears, I guess we could eat blueberries. It's like, yes, of course. What are gummy bears made out of? Yeah, just plain old, no micronutrients at all, probably tons of high fructose corn syrup. So, and dyes, not to mention. Yes, exactly. So the week before, plant-based eating, high carb, and don't worry about percentages. We're going to create a plate in a second. But I want those bright colors to show up because not only are these high in carbs, they're also loaded with antioxidants, which truly helps the muscles to repair and regenerate, all the while giving the muscles the energy from the sugars that they need. Question?
Well, you said you were going to get to the plate because I thought like most athletes do stock up on like pasta. Is it just veggie pasta? Like like you can use which one makes the spaghetti? Is it the squash? That makes the noodles?
Yeah.
So is it those type of carbs that they're using or veggie?
Any.
Veggie pastas that you can find.
Any of those count.
Okay.
Carbs of all types.
Okay.
So that's why I didn't even want to get too much in the weeds. Carbs of all types, so plant-based. But there were specific studies that talked about some superfoods. Again, the whole reason why I opened Powerhouse Bakery was to get powerhouse foods. And that's really not my term. I mean, Powerhouse Foods is an industry term And I just kind of jumped on the bandwagon and called my place that. But Powerhouse Foods means that it has a very high ORAC value, ORAC, oxidative reactive absorbency capacity. I know that's a weird oxidative reactive absorbency capacity, but that's actually a term that scientists use when they're measuring how much antioxidants does a food have. So do you think iceberg or cherries has a higher ORAC value? Yeah, see, it's kind of like obvious. In fact, when I listened to Dr. Wargovich, so many years ago, his big focus was on watermelon. And I used to think watermelon was kind of too much sugar, but no, it's like got all these great antioxidants. Its ORAC value is quite high. The only problem is we've screwed it up, and instead of having a slice or two of watermelon, we stick our whole face into it and eat it all because it's so good, right? Okay, so before the workout, we want high carb, we want lots of colors, but now let me just back up a little and say, what about GI distress, right? Some people before an activity can't handle too much of the fiber, too much of the sugars, so you gotta kind of know your body. And when I was a coach with HEB, I found a lot of challenges with athletes because their tummies would get upset. And mine included. I mean, if I was going to do a marathon, I knew I could not eat the morning of. I had to do a really good job getting all my shelves in my garage filled so that when the event was there, I would just have some water and maybe a little bit of oatmeal. Actually, my favorite was a granola bar because very small amount and a good amount of simple sugars. So we got to know our bodies a little and we have to practice it. But switching to fats or proteins is probably not the way to go. Okay, so now in the little bit of time we have left, I want to start creating some days. Let's go through. Oh yes, okay. Before I create our plate, I want to share this slide, and this is one that you don't have. And so what I wanted to kind of share with you here is the calorie density. So this is a term that not only helps us pick out foods that we use for our pre-workout because they're getting easier to digest, but also when we are conscientious about trying to exercise with the goal of weight loss and still fuel our bodies. Because let's face it, we want to enjoy the exercise and we don't want to be exhausted just because we're doing a dance class or a hike on Saturday. We don't want that to ruin our day, right? And so what this slide is really telling us is the lower density fruits and vegetables are going to be the best sources of building your glycogen. Oils, nuts, and seeds, and I'm a lover of oils and nuts and seeds, but those should be consumed at a different time of the day, not right before or right after your exercise. That's the smoking gun of this slide. I just wanted you to know that it's really better because not only does the density of the calories influence how many total calories we take in. So if we're trying to not gain weight, or remember when I drew that little picture over here of the food that we eat, and we don't want it to go to the sassy fat cells. We want it to, again, go to glycogen. The calorie density, glycogen, the calorie density matters because we want it to go into our shelves and stay there ready for our blood sugar, okay? So you want to top off your energy reserves with your pre-workout meal. And here is an example of what that day might look like. And it's food you already eat. So that's the good news. Again, in a lot of my research, I was seeing textbook resources that I used in my master's classes. So it's like, yay, it's nothing really new. In all the years that I've been out of college, out of my master's programming, the science is still pretty much the same. And that is that we know how the physiology of the muscles work, and we need to feed it good carbohydrates with lots of micronutrients, AKA bright colors, and we're gonna do pretty well. So here's an example. A couple slices of toast, maybe some blueberries, some dairy yogurt. You could have a little bit of honey. So what's neat about this is when we look at toast, whether you pick whole wheat or Ezekiel, Um, it's going to give you a blend of complex and simple carbohydrates. The yogurt's really cool because yogurt is a nice blend. Does it have protein and carbohydrates? Yes. And a little caveat that you can surprise your friends with is that yogurt is also a great source of branched chain amino acids. So if you have grandsons or nephews that are throwing down some BCAAs before their workout, you can go, no, I know better, right? Because I'm telling you, it's a multi-million-dollar industry to sell BCAAs for energy. And what's really in it? It's bright pink. It's got all kinds of diet sweeteners and colors. It tastes like yucky. And all they needed to do is get some dairy protein, and they'll have that or better. Because remember that little note I mentioned, the study that looked at vitamin C given to athletes did not help their recovery. In fact, it was worse than having those foods that were high in vitamin C. So supplementation absolutely does not help the athlete, but yogurt does. And then also another idea would be something like a lentil wrap. And I know this takes a little practice because of like, how do you make lentils and work into a wrap? But you just make them the texture of kind of like a ground beef. So you got to put a little bit of tomato paste. You got to cook them a little bit. Just work your recipe or check out my videos where I cooked lentils for you. And you can kind of see that texture that I feel like is so good. But you could also leave it out completely and go with granola, coconut yogurt with pumpkin seeds, even an oatmeal raisin cookie, right? So how cool is that? You could have a cookie for breakfast. Sure, depends on how you make it. It doesn't have to be loaded with sugar, but the sugar is going to help with the simple carbohydrates. So then we decide what kind of sugar should we pick. Remember, we want it to be high in micronutrients. So you guys know my classes so well, you're going to go, yeah, so if we use honey or organic coconut sugar, that means we have minerals and extra nutrients in the coconut sugar, so it's a win-win. It gives us readily available energy for our activity, it tastes darn good, and it's going to give you the recovery components that we so much need, rather than the gummy bears. Okay? Questions about that?
I just realized lentil had sugar. I don't think lentils with sugar. I thought they were just a protein.
Yes, I'm so glad you're saying that, because no, every food is going to have a blend. And that's why I was so happy to hear this cycling coach go, stop trying to figure your macros. Just eat good food. And so, if you liked, if you liked whole wheat bread, Nature's Own, or you like the Ezekiel, that's kind of like the two extremes. It's going to have some protein. It's going to have some fiber. It's going to have some sugars, aka carbs. So you can pick which one you like the best. There's reasons to pick different ones. A lot of the divas and dudes that I work with that are in the throes of treatment, I recommend they use sourdough bread because it's really easy to digest, doesn't have a lot of fiber, doesn't have any nuts and seeds in it, and it's so much easier on their tummy, and it's a little bit fermented. But if you like chunky bread, then you could certainly go with one that has more sprouted grains. And I'm so glad you brought this up because lentils are a huge source of carbs. In 1 cup, it's, I don't know, don't quote me, but I think it's like 22 grams of carbs, 14 grams of protein. And then fats, well, not much, maybe 1 gram until you add some olive oil or some nuts and seeds, depending on how you want to dress it up. But it's a really good scenario. Another one that's similar to this is edamame. And I know all of us are kind of like, no, don't make me eat tofu. But I'm telling you, if you get used to doing it, it's kind of good. I just bought the silken tofu and I'm learning how to make scramble with it. But I still am a fan of lentils. I have a couple of vegan friends and they laugh at me because we always have lentils in our fridge. It's like, don't you get tired of them? It's like, well, no, we dress them differently. You can put them in a wrap. You can make them into patties. Of course, you can do all kinds of things. So whenever I see the superfood list, oats and lentils and of course these bright colors always show up. And when you're fueling your active body, this is the stuff that we focus on. Don't try to figure out how to get your 8 ounces of chicken in each day. Chicken's fine, but it's not the stuff of endurance. It's really a good way to rebuild and repair, and so certainly have it in your day, just not as a part of your post-workout. You know, for my 7 years working at Lifetime Fitness, so many people would work out really hard and go down and get their protein shake, and they would be so proud. This has no carbs. I'm eating this shake and it has 100 calories, 50 grams of protein, and only 1 carb. And it's like, oh, you just screwed up. Yeah, you just screwed up because you didn't do anything to help build your shelves. You didn't rebuild your muscle, because that's going to happen when you're sleeping and you've already peed out all that protein shake that you just had. Okay, so really quick little slide here. I know you can't read that, so I was going to read it for you. Many of the commercial calorie replacement products, are expensive and are not any better than whole foods. Additionally, they are typically dense in macronutrients but poor in micronutrients. So that protein shake, while it had 50 grams of protein, didn't have any of the other micronutrients that our body needs in order to do the rebuild and the repair. So don't waste your money on supplements. Instead, spend your money on some beautiful veggies and fruits. This one is really cool too. I got 2 more minutes, so I want to show you this one. When we think of ergogenic aids, and I did my whole master's thesis on ergogenic aids, because back in the day I was a serious athlete and I wanted to find every possible way to get an edge. And lo and behold, there isn't any. And there still isn't any. I wish there was. It takes hard work, it takes dedication, consistency, and good nutrition. Good nutrition from a whole lot of good carbohydrates, moderate amount of proteins, and not a whole lot of fat. But interesting here, arugula, beets, and caffeine. Again, pretty real foods. I trained the first ever local winner of the Rock and Roll Marathon. First guy ever to win that was local. And he was my client, and when he first came to me, his diet was chicken, sweet potato, chicken, protein shake. That's all I ever eat, Suzanne. Like, okay, how am I going to help him? And so we first changed what he ate for his the day of. So I said, I want you to eat a bagel, 2 bananas, and a cup of coffee. And he's like, what? I've never had coffee. I'm like, well, now you are. And so he did it, and he's like, wow, I felt so good. It's like, yeah, isn't caffeine the best? You know, because it is truly an ergogenic aid. It lowers your pain threshold, and of course, it gives you a little boost of energy. And, interesting caveat, it increases the free fatty acids in your blood. Now, that probably doesn't have anything to do with your burst of energy, but it does give you another fuel source besides just your blood sugar. So it helps to kind of preserve the blood sugar if you're burning fats. So caffeine definitely helps. So if you have your little bit of espresso, and you know, there's all kinds of calculations to say you should have so many milligrams per kg of body weight. No, just have a cup of coffee. Now, what I don't recommend is taking caffeine pills, or taking the specialty drinks like Red Bull, Monster. All those are dangerous because they also add taurine and other herbal supplements that are very hard to manage and control, and they can cause your smooth muscle cells to do the, oh no, I'm going to run away, and you're going to have problems. So don't go that route, but a good old cup of coffee or a cup of tea, especially green tea, great dose of caffeine. No, because it's taken out the caffeine. And I'm glad you asked that, because the decaffeinating process is a potential carcinogen. So if you're trying to avoid caffeine, just go herbals, and now you've got all kinds of polyphenols to enjoy in the herbal teas. But if you want a little hint of caffeine, coffee and green tea. Now, what about beets and arugula? You know I sell beet juice here for a reason. It has nitrates. And you're going to go, what? I thought nitrates were bad. Naturally occurring nitrates actually help course it's a small amount, but actually help your hemoglobin hold on to oxygen. How cool is that? So beets are beautiful and they're back in fashion. So I don't know that I could eat beets out of a jar that have been pickled. I've never done that, but they're good in a salad. But roasted beets are the bomb, and if you've never tried beet juice, we add ginger, which is another great antioxidant. We add all kinds of lemon juice and orange juice, and so give it a try. But even topping the beet juice is arugula in the amount of nitrates. So, what's that?
You said orange juice. I was like, that's a lot of sugar too.
Well, it's 2 tablespoons.
Okay.
2 tablespoons of orange juice in the beet juice.
Okay.
And so, yeah, see, our first mind is, oh gosh, sugar. But sugar's not a bad thing when we use it appropriately. And so if you had too much, yeah, now your fat cells are going to open up and say, all right, come on in. But if you use it as part of your diet, then you can build your shelves. First, you've got to challenge the body so those shelves get built, and then you eat the sugars and it goes into the shelves and the fat cells get cut off. So arugula and beets are a great source of nitrates, which are so cool because for the athlete and even for us recreational lovers of fitness, they're loaded with color, micronutrients, and who knows, maybe even a little bit of ergogenic aids. So there you have it. I think it's so exciting to realize that there's lots we can do. And I've included a recipe for you for some oatmeal cookies that are absolutely legal for breakfast. All right? So I hope you've enjoyed today, and I'm so excited to hear what you do for your activities coming up, and we will absolutely get to share some more. All right? Thank you so much.